Good morning. I am excited to be here. I am excited that you are here. I am excited for this sermon series that we're beginning today. So, out of the 20 feelings that we were giving us an option to choose from, today we're going to be focusing on these three: Worry Rock, Weary Trail, Lonely Island. And what we're going to do, like Derek was saying, we're going to be doing this every week. We're going to be looking at a specific character in the Bible or a specific story in the Bible. And today we're going to be looking at Elijah. And as it was read this morning, Elijah has this wonderful event where he basically demonstrates that God is the only God. And that is what we believe, amen? In the Old Testament, and maybe all throughout Scripture, there's nothing like this. Elijah showing the people of God, the Israelites, that God is the one. And he basically, what he says, he has 450 prophets from Baal in front of him, and the king of Israel, Ahab. And he says, you guys have one bull, and I'll have another bull. And we're going to ask for God to send fire. You go first. And so they do. They say, it's fine. And they start calling on Baal. Baal answered us. But there was no sound. No one answered. And this happened throughout the whole day. And at the end of the day, there was no sound. No one answered. And then Elijah approaches the altar. And then he calls upon the Lord and he says, answer me, Lord. Answer me so that these people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. And God says, okay, I will say yes, at least to the first part of your request. Sometimes we got to analyze what we're asking for. And sometimes we got to be careful. There are two parts to the request that Elijah has here. First, he says, answer me so that these people will know that you, the Lord, are God. And that's what happens. People at the end will say, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. But the second part of his request is, and that you have turned their hearts back. And it doesn't say here, but what Elijah wants is that everyone's heart. Have you ever been in that position? Have you ever been in that position where you're asking God for the whole world, everyone, to turn their hearts to God? And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news because this is a gospel sermon, and gospel sermons have good news. But the reality is, you can pray all you want, but it probably ain't going to happen. Not everybody will follow God. And until you're inside of you, until you're kind of okay with that, but you do your job, you will probably face difficulties, a lot of difficulties in this world. When you are serving God, He's on your side. Things are going well. What could possibly go wrong? How can we have Elijah, who demonstrates that God is God in this way? 450 prophets praying for Baal. There was no answer. And here's Elijah. He just prays to God. This bowl in the altar was full with water. And God sends the fire. How can we have, at this time, God's greatest servant ever to go worried, weary, lonely? From what we've read so far, up until 1 Kings 18, the 11th book in the Bible, up until right now, there's no indication that Elijah will ever feel that. Is that your life today? Has that been your life at some point? You believed in God. You showed others that God is God. And there was no indication that you would feel that you would feel worried, that you would feel weary, that you would feel lonely. So let's start with worry, the worry rock. And we finish the chapter in 1 Kings 18, and that's the expectation that Elijah has. Everybody will follow God with their hearts turned to him. And we start in verse 1 in 1 Kings 19, and we got to understand this. When Elijah demonstrated that God is God, there was King Ahab, but there was not his wife. His wife wasn't there, Jezreel. So what happens is in verse 1 in 1 Kings 19, Ahab, the king, goes to Jezebel, his wife, the queen, and he tells her everything that Elijah had done. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, may the gods punish me and do so severely if I don't make your life like the dead prophets by this time tomorrow. And I've highlighted, underlined, tomorrow. Then Elijah became afraid and ran for his life. There's something about tomorrow, isn't it? When you are told the bad news of what something's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, if it was me and my life was threatened, I would rather be threatened about it today and not be told, hey, tomorrow you're going to die. I would rather you tell me, if you were a doctor today and you're going to tell me I'm going to die tomorrow or in a week, I would rather know now that I'm going to die like right now. That's just me. And so Elijah is told by this time tomorrow. And so here we see that God's servants can experience worry and anxiety. I mean, when we talk about worry, it's letting your mind dwell on difficulties, on troubles. And when we talk about anxiety, it's this feeling of uncertainty, probably typically about an imminent event that is going to happen. Some people have anxiety about death, and it's coming for all of us. It's something that we cannot avoid. It's an imminent event. But then sometimes it's about a future event that won't happen. I've read this recently, but 90% of our fears, in average, in world's population, 90% of our fears never happen. Does that make sense? 90% of our fears never actually happen. And so he gets worried. And I have two questions for you. The first one, what's your mindset? If you look at worry, and I've underlined the word mind, worry, mind. In the word anxiety, I've underlined the word feeling. Feelings and mind, thoughts and feelings. My question is, when you serve, what is your mindset? What's on your mind? What are your thoughts when you are serving? Because we can talk about anxiety from the world's perspective and psychological, but when we talk about spiritual, in the spiritual sense, and we're all trying to serve God, what is in our minds when we are trying to serve? And so Philippians 2:5 says, have the same mindset as Jesus, or adopt the same attitude as Jesus. It's the same word, phroneo. My friend Chase Turner, it's like I'm seeing him right now teaching about this. The Greek word, phroneo. And that was about 9 years ago. I don't remember which country we were in. But my friend Chase taught about this, and it's one of those lessons that you actually hear. And I mean, it's been like 9 years since that, and I still remember it. And I probably need to, I'll text him later and say, hey, look, I still remember that story. He probably doesn't know that I do remember that. And he was teaching about phroneo. And phroneo, I mean, if you look at it, one version says, have the mindset of Jesus. The other version says, have the attitude of Jesus. We have the Reina Valera in Spanish, and it says, have the same feeling of Jesus. Well, which one is it? Well, it's all three. In psychology, there's, you probably heard this, but there are theories and different therapies and focuses. There's this one that is very famous and very familiar in the United States. People use it a lot. Is CBT, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. Then there is the REBT, Rational Emotional Behavioral Therapy. A lot of people use those to provide counseling, to provide psychology. And you hear the words that I'm saying: cognitive, mindset, behavioral, attitude, inactions. REBT, Rational Emotional Behavioral Therapy. Rational thoughts, emotional, what you feel about it, what you're telling yourself, how you feel about it. Behavioral, how you portray that in your daily lives. Therapy. So psychology, I mean, when you look at Philippians 2:5, Paul is talking about Jesus. I mean, Jesus is the great psychologist. And that word phroneo is amazing. I love it. Because when you connect all three, your thoughts, your feelings, and your attitude towards life, I can say, hey, you got it. You actually got it. I can finish the sermon right here. I can finish the series right here. But no, we won't. We won't do that. So what was the mindset of Jesus? Matthew 6, right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, don't worry. Just to give you a heads up, if you ever tell me don't worry, you better have a solution. Wives can relate because probably all of you who are wives here, you have your husbands here, you probably heard from your husband at least once in your life, hey honey, don't worry about it. Quit worrying about it. That's kind of like the worst thing that you can ever say to a spouse. If you're not married, write it down. If you're married, hey, take her to lunch and say, I'm sorry. But one of the worst things that you can say to someone is, don't worry about it. Unless you're Jesus and he actually has the solution, right? So Jesus can say that. What are you going to gain from worrying? Look at the question in verse 27. Can you add a single hour to your life? I mean, this is Jesus hundreds of years later after Elijah, and Elijah is probably thinking that. How can I add an hour to my life? My life is going to end tomorrow. And that's why Jesus in verse 34 says, don't worry about tomorrow. What is going to happen tomorrow with Elijah? The promise from the queen is, you're going to die by tomorrow. Don't worry about tomorrow, Jesus says, because I will provide what you need. And that's the mindset. When you are worried, here's the second question. Is the worry rational or irrational? This is big. It sounds so simple. It sounds so teeny, tiny, petite, but it's actually huge in your life. Whenever you have thoughts, if you are able to ask yourself, is this rational or irrational? In the case of Elijah, we have a lot of evidence that it was rational. I was asking Catherine and Dana this morning if they remember this. 2019, I used to be a photographer back in the day, and I had Nikon cameras and equipment. And so in 2019, I was selling all of it, selling all my cameras and equipment to take Dana to Spain to her mom. And so I was selling all of that, and one guy wanted to buy it. And so when he came to buy it, he sent me an Uber. Red flags. And I said, where are you? He said, no, just put the cameras and all the equipment in the Uber. The money is in your bank account. I said, I'm sorry, man, I don't do. I was like, at that moment I knew. I was like, I'm in trouble. I told the Uber driver, I said, sorry, go away. We'll fix it later, but I ain't putting the cameras here. Anyway, the guy ended up threatening me and saying, you're going to die. I'm going to stab you, all this, all that. And so I called Catherine. I said, don't come home. Go to my parents' house. I'm picking Dana up from school. So I went to get Dana. I picked her up from school. I took her to my parents. I went to the police station. I filed a police report. I mean, I had evidence that was going to happen, and I had evidence to trust that he was just bluffing. He was probably somewhere just trying to scare me off so I wouldn't do a police report. But I guess you never know. And so here with Elijah, he has enough evidence to say, hey, my life is threatened. I'm going to die tomorrow. But what just happened, he showed that God is God by asking God for fire and God sending fire to a bowl that is filled with water. What were the odds? The reality is, all of us believers, people of faith, we have so much evidence. We have so much evidence that God is in our side and that, hey, people can take our life away, our earthly life. Hey, but spiritual life, no one can do harm to us. We have evidence of that, enough evidence of that. And so whenever we have thoughts, we have to ask ourselves which thoughts are rational and which thoughts are irrational. Number 2, weary. The weary trail. Sometimes you feel this. You feel stressed out, worn out, weary from the things you've been through. And this is what happens to Elijah. So he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. He said, I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than anyone. He lay down and slept. The CSB commentators say, I mean, they don't question this. They say he was in deep depression. They don't suggest it. They just say it like that, plainly. Deep depression. Wow. He's asking to that. Some of you may have heard people say, you know, if you're a real Christian, if you're a true Christian, you wouldn't want to ever die or take your life. Well, let me just show you. Here's Elijah, greatest servant of all time up until now. What about Moses? Moses asked the Lord, please kill me right now in Numbers 11. What about Jonah? And here's a big spoiler alert. Next week, Jonah. We're going to look at Jonah next week, if you want to come. If not, now you know. Next week is Jonah. But in Jonah chapter 4, he says, take my life from me. What about Judas? Spent 3 years with Jesus and decided to actually end his life. There's people like that, people that grow weary, people that want to take their lives. We're not exempt from that. 3 years ago, a minister in one of the largest churches in Memphis, Tennessee, a minister decided to take his life in the church parking lot area in the woods. One of my classmates at the time, in one of my courses for the masters, he's one of my friends, he found him dead. A minister. I'm a minister, and a lot of you do ministering. We're not exempt from one day waking up and saying, you know what? I don't know why I feel this way, but I don't want to live. I don't want to live any longer. I'm not putting any ideation in your minds, but I'm saying this is real, and we don't talk about it enough. People's minds, feelings, and attitudes towards life sometimes is, I don't want it anymore. Life is too hard to live it. If you felt that way, you probably come to church and you feel like judged by others. You probably even think God is judging you for feeling that way, and so you don't share it with anyone. You may share it with a therapist as long as they're not Christian, because they may understand you more. Let me tell you, I can't speak for everybody here. I don't have that power, but I can say some of us, including me, I won't judge you if you feel that way. Hey, some of us have felt that way. I grew up in the church. I'm an elder's kid. You know, there's a lot of pressuring me, maybe from others and from myself, to not ever feel that. And so I empathize. but some days are harder than others, right? And we live in a town, those of us who live here, we live in a town that at 4:30, and you're going to see it later probably if you haven't seen it already, 4:30 it gets dark. Winter is coming. And sometimes it's coming hard on your feelings, on your thoughts, on your hearts, on your attitudes. You may be dragging yourself through life and you grow weary. And weary is this feeling of showing tiredness, especially as a result of excessive exertion or lack of sleep. But all of this, when you look at that definition, all of that is physical. What about the emotional weary? What about that? And God provides basic needs. And that's why with Elijah, he goes to sleep in verse 5. He lay down and slept. And suddenly there's this angel that touched him and said, get up and eat. And the angel baked bread and he gave him a jug of water. So Elijah ate and drank and lay down again, eating, sleeping, drinking water. If you don't do that enough, it's time. And so Tim Keller preaches about Elijah. I love it because he says, it was angel food cake. I don't know if you understood it, but I'll put it back to you, for you. He said, get up and eat. He baked some bread. He's an angel, so angel food cake. All right. If you like humor, there it is. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. So, weary. He provides food and rest, but he also provides healthy limits. He says, get up and eat because the journey will be too much for you. And so he gets up, he walks 40 days and 40 nights. Think about that. Think about Jesus, 40 days, 40 nights. Think about the Israelites, 40 years walking in the desert. So Elijah walks 40 days and 40 nights all the way to Horeb, the mountain of God. He entered the cave, and guess what he did? Spend the night. He slept some more. Sometimes you feel like tired from all the things that you're doing. It could be that you're doing so much. It could be that you're doing so much out of your comfort zone, things that you're not comfortable with. But sometimes, let me tell you, when you're emotionally weary and is connected to spirituality in your spiritual life, let me tell you this, and this may sound overwhelming. 1 hour, 5 minutes spent in the church building is weary enough. You can serve God 70 hours a week and not be weary because you have the mindset of Jesus. But sometimes you're so weary that even walking through that door, even the thought of coming is weary enough. If you don't rest today, your body or your mind or both will eventually force you to rest. And for that, sometimes for some people, that means you're going to die. If you don't rest today, but not only physically, your mind, your emotions, if you don't rest today, your body one day and your mind one day will say, we've had enough. You're not resting us. We're putting you to rest. You don't want that. So you want to get healthy limits today. When we talk about weary versus rested, when we talk about weary, we have all these words: stressed, burnout, burden, overloaded, lacking limits and healthy boundaries. And sometimes in church and in Christianity, we may not value rested servants enough. You know, if I came to you and said, and some of you know this, but if I said, Fridays is my day off. You're like, Fridays is your day off, Diego. We're paying you. We're not paying you to have Fridays off. And Saturdays, sometimes you're off, and sometimes I'm not off. Sometimes I'm not off Fridays, I'm not off Saturdays. Sometimes I'm working 7 days a week, to be honest with you. But I intentionally try to have 1 or 2 days, full days, at least one day, where I disconnect from work, from ministry. And sometimes, and many times, and we're not going to talk about guilt today. That's coming up in another Sunday. But I felt so guilty. I did 11 years of ministry, full-time ministry in Costa Rica. And I've done ministry here. I did a Free Hardeman with the spiritual growth with the athletes. And now I'm doing ministry here. And I still struggle. At my 40 years of age, I struggle to not feel guilt from resting. Because we live in a society that values the hard-working people. You know the man that says, I'll rest when I die. You've heard that. You probably said it. We don't value rested servants, but Jesus said it in Matthew 11. He said, come to me, all the weary, all the burden, and I will give you what? I will give you what? Rest. Wow. Amazing. Where was that in the Bible? I've read it 1,000,000 times. I grew up in the church. We've sang this song so many times. Learn from me, and you will find what? Rest. The mindset of Jesus, the attitude of Jesus, the feeling of Jesus. Jesus was a rested servant. And you want to be like Jesus, but you're not resting enough? It doesn't make sense. And I hope we get that. And the third one is lonely. The lonely island. Sometimes you feel alone, abandoned, unloved, or unwanted, like nobody else cares, understands, or even tries to. And so Elijah said to the people, this is back in 1 Kings 18, look at his introduction. Before he has all these feelings and he's aware of all of that. I am the only remaining prophet of the Lord. That was his introduction. Let's have a contest. I'm going to be in this corner, 450 of you in that corner with the king of Israel. Let's have 2 bulls, see who wins. To God be the glory. Hey, by the way, I am the only one. Have you ever felt that? There's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. That is healthy solitude. You need time alone from time to time. Like when you go to the bathroom, you need time alone. Right? In the spiritual sense too, you need time alone sometimes. Even me, who loves being surrounded by people. I need time alone sometimes. I've come to that conclusion, sometimes in the hard way. You can still be accompanied, surrounded by people, and still feel lonely. There are so many spouses, so many wives, so many husbands, so many people with family living in a crowded home, in a house, who feel lonely. It's not the physical thing of being alone. Elijah, in verse 3 in 1 Kings 19, he left his servant. He said, I don't need you anymore. Isn't that amazing? Elijah left his servant because he said, I'm not doing ministry. I don't want to be with anyone. See, it's not that people left Elijah. He left everybody. He left his servant and he went into the wilderness on a day's journey and fell asleep. And God provides another basic need. You may be eating, you may be sleeping, you may be drinking enough water. What about counseling? What about somebody who listens to you? And God says, what are you doing here, Elijah? A question. Ever heard of Socratic questioning? It's very important. My wife is a psychologist, so I know all this information from that, and also because I have the master's in pastoral counseling, but counseling is so important, it's so beneficial. If you don't believe it, it's probably time you do, because there's so much evidence in the Bible from God about counseling, about psychology. Even if you don't believe it, it may be time to start believing it now. What are you doing here, Elijah? The best thing a husband can ever do, ask the wife a question rather than tell her how to fix it. And so we believe the thoughts that we repeat. This is something that is very true. The more you say it to yourself, you start believing it. Look at this, and this is very interesting. This is not a typo, but look at verse 9 and 10. Now look at verses 13 and 14. Did you see that? Again, verses 9 and 10. Again, verses 13 and 14. The same question. What are you doing here, Elijah? And the same answer. The answer is, I am the only one left. I am the only one left. And so, we have to ask the question, rational or irrational? Is the thought of, I am the only one, rational? Is that true? Is that actually true? Or you're saying it so much that you're starting to believe it. And so, this is how God finishes with Elijah. He says, go back. There's other 7,000 serving me. There are other 7,000 that haven't bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. Big disappointment for Elijah. He thought he was the only one, but he was not. Just briefly to end today, I want to talk a little bit about my testimony. This is the church that I was serving. In 2018, we took that picture, and we're about 160 people. Me and Catherine are like up there in the middle, and Dana is like, like right there. I'm sorry. She's like, no need to point. Everybody knows who Dana is. So January 4th, 2017, I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought I was going to die. I left Catherine asleep. I went to the hospital, and I thought I was going to die. And I told the doctor, I can't breathe. And she said, Mr. Diego, if you wouldn't breathe, you would have already died. I said, that makes sense. I still can't breathe. 5 in the morning, I went home, realizing, hey, I don't know what I have, but I'm going crazy. This is January 4th. We were on vacation. My parents came and picked us up to go. My dad was going to go fishing. I have never gone fishing with my dad. Up until today, I haven't. But he picked us up. He was going to have his fishing thing. How do you call that? I don't even know what it's called. Am I a real man? What is that? The fishing? Fish pole. Thank you. Hey, there's always a learning opportunity. The fish pole. And I know the word in Spanish, but I didn't know the word in English. Anyway, we're going to go. And so my dad drives 4 hours. And we're approaching the ocean in Costa Rica. And we stop for lunch. Everybody orders food. I can't sit down. I walk around the town, and like tears just coming down my eyes. And I talked to a doctor, and I said, I went to this like pharmacy where there was a doctor, and I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. And he gave me a pill, kind of chilled down. I went back, and I told my family, can we just go back? My parents were like, sure. Catherine was like, sure. We drove 4 hours back. That was the hardest week of my life. I didn't know what was going on. Thankfully, I found this psychologist by the name of Ana Gutierrez, who I'm so thankful for her. Man, she helped me so much. I didn't know what was going on with me, but basically it was panic attacks. And in 2019, we finally took Dana to Spain, but taking her to Spain took us to England, and I had a meeting in the Church of Christ in Manchester in December 2019. And so Catherine and Dana are in London, and I am in Manchester, and I am in this Starbucks. Okay, I wasn't planning that. I'm going to take the picture away. There may be some trauma there. I can't even see the picture, but I took that picture from Google Maps. I found the Starbucks in the Arndale in the mall in Manchester. I sat there that morning, and I called Catherine, and Catherine answered, and I couldn't even talk like right now. Words were not coming out of my mouth. And she said, honey, what's going on? And I said, I don't know. I have no idea. And the only thing that I could explain later when we talked again, because I couldn't talk at that moment, so we just hung up. And she's in London with Dana, with the big transit strikes that were going on, and they were like going crazy. And I'm here in Manchester, and I said, I just feel the loneliest ever. I was surrounded by so many people in Manchester, and I just felt lonely. And so I just want to tell you, sometimes we feel like that. I still have panic attacks. Last week, I woke up in the middle of the night with a panic attack. And I spent an hour and a half just standing in the house with panic attacks, doing breathing exercises, and all the tools that have been given to me by the mercy of God, which I am so thankful. See, your story can be like, oh, I'm having panic attacks and I'm going to die, and this is the worst that can ever happen to me. And that used to be my thought. And now it's like, I'm having panic attacks, but I know I can handle them. They're not in my control. They come whenever they want to. They came in August when we were in Costa Rica on vacation. I spent 3 hours in the middle of the night in my sister-in-law's apartment, just going back and forward from the bedroom to the living room. And you feel like you're going crazy, and then you realize this is going to pass. God's got it. I put it on Him. It's out of my control. It's something I cannot handle. It's something I cannot control. I can only do what I've been taught. Breathing exercises, letting go. My question to you, just like Elijah, just like me, I'm nowhere near Elijah. I'm just giving my testimony. But my question is, what is your testimony? Are you feeling worried, weary, lonely? Perhaps you have. If you have felt that way, there's an answer. You can come to Jesus. It won't fix everything like right now, but it'll be the start. When I've kept it to myself and I've not told anyone, things have gotten worse. The best thing that I could ever do was open up. This is not about telling the world all your issues. This is about trusting God and trusting God's people. I hope this lesson is applicable to you. I thank you for your time, and I hope that you have a very happy Thanksgiving. I'm so thankful. This week I'm going to spend it with my family, with my friends, with my brothers and sisters in Christ, and I'm thankful. I'm a 40-year-old, very blessed man. I can live with this. It's okay. God has allowed it for a reason. I can do it because He can. I probably can't do it alone. I need all of you, and I need God. And perhaps you feel that need just like I do. Thank you for your time. May God bless you.